show, we're going to talk about how the brain buys and why most people get it wrong. See, what's cool is over the last probably 10 years or so, they've really been doing some awesome research using fMRIs to study the brain in action while people are trying to make decisions and showing how there's certain things that we really didn't know that are happening. There's a lot of stuff unconsciously that we do that by having these studies, by having these scans, we're actually able to see that, wow, especially in sales, there's a lot of times we're presenting information and it's completely missing the mark. Now, these are things that we already may know intuitively, but the really exciting parts is that as I read books like Subliminal or Thinking Fast and Slow and The Winner's Brain, I start to get a better understanding of what's really going on under the hood, and that we can have a massive advantage by better understanding neuroscience, cognition, psychology, sociology, so that we can start to make better decisions on how we present our information. Now let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about the brain, how it's evolved. The brain is really made up of three major areas. The first one is our reptilian brain, and that's our oldest brain, and that's responsible for fight or flight, for survival. It's the thing that when we walk into a room, we start to say, do I trust this person or not trust this person? It's also the thing that if somebody scares us, it shocks us into paying attention. The second part of our brain, as we started to evolve, we built the limbic system. The limbic system is really responsible for our emotions, our associative memory. It's what allows us to put things into social context. It's the thing that tells us what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and whether we're attracted to people or not. And then as we evolved, we developed this neocortex, and this is the layer that surrounds the limbic system, and that's really responsible for logic and thinking and rational thought. But one of the challenges we have is that most of the time when we're selling, we're positioning our offer to this neocortex. We have all heard that the brain is like a massive computer, and if we just put all of our information together, the other computer is going to process it because it's really, really powerful. But that's not how it works. Everything we do is to be able to present effectively. Think about in your own life, is you have to keep that reptilian brain at bay. You have to tap into that limbic system so you get people to, resist that urge to push back, tapping into the limbic system to get them excited about what you're talking about so that they'll pay attention to the neocortex and to the logic and the facts and figures that you're selling. And so if you really think about it, what happens is the reptilian brain, its job is to say, if this isn't exciting or interesting, I'm not going to pay attention. I'm not going to it's like the gatekeeper to the neocortex. It says, I'm not going to pass this information on. If it is new and exciting, then it filters it and says, what am I actually going to push through so that we can make a decision? So not everything's actually going to that logical brain. So it doesn't matter how well thought out your information is, unless you're tapping into this limbic system and keeping that reptilian brain at bay, everything you say doesn't make sense. And what ends up happening is that we just bash people over the head with features and benefits and features and benefits. And that's why I love this picture, this quote: the interrogate, judge, fix model is a pathway to disconnection. This idea of the consultative selling where we just ask a bunch of questions and then we try and fix it for people, it really is just, we're yelling at them, features and benefits. But what we need to be doing is coming at them from a place where we're starting to get and keep their attention. But really, how do you keep attention? As you go in and present, with people being so overwhelmed and busy these days, how do we make sure that when we're speaking to them, that what we're saying is actually hitting home? And then once they start to drift off, which is absolutely normal, how do we get their attention back? And so understanding that and even asking yourself that question is going to give you an edge next time you go and speak. Because I think in when we talked about tested processes, I was telling you, if you're looking at somebody and you say something to them and they stare at you blankly, it probably wasn't very good. So if you find your customer's eyes are glazing over, or you're not sure what to do, then you need to be able to bring that attention back. One of the ways you can do it is by interrupting patterns. So if you're presenting something and you're losing that momentum, stop them. Ask them a question. Do something different. Maybe, tell them something personal. Shake it up a little bit. These are called pattern interrupts, right? And what you're trying to do is create excitement. Get that reptilian brain to all of a sudden go, oh, I better pay attention. And when we're paying attention, we start to connect with them emotionally, and that limbic system kicks in. Now, when we start to share with them logically, it's going to connect on a better level. Now, another big powerful thing that you can look at in the brain is the concept of mirror neurons. And this is a recent study over the last about 20 years or so, is they're looking at mirror neurons. It's the same thing as if you watch somebody eating a banana, it fires in the same brain receptors as if you were eating that banana. If you've ever been up late at night and you're dreaming, you're starting to fall asleep and you're dreaming that you're falling or you're riding a bike or you're doing some kind of a sports activity, you visualize it, your body fires. You ever have that sort of the leg that kicks out? And so your mirror neurons are happening when you're dealing with other people, when they're dealing with you, and also as you're visualizing. So you can tap into other people's emotions. One of the natural things, have you ever smiled at somebody and they smile back? And when somebody's angry, you start to feel angry. This is a very powerful concept, is our bodies are, because we're social creatures, we're looking for those connections. And so emotionally we're connected whether we like it or not, which also goes into empathy. When we start to go into how to ask questions and build those customer segments, empathy plays a huge role. And the better you can connect with your empathetic skills and tap into those mirror neurons, the more likely psychologically you're going to connect with your customers. And actions. When you take actions, when you do certain things, we've heard about mirroring before, but more as a manipulation tactic in sales. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that when you take the first step, your customers are much more likely to take a step with you, which brings us to a really big point, which is being vulnerable. One of the things that I learned that was really helpful for me was the faster I could be vulnerable and be more authentic and be really connected with people and share things that I'm concerned about or something that I wasn't sure about or a personal story. And I shared that with customers. Not in a crazy, like we're having a counseling session kind of way, but just where we're sharing, that we're open to ideas and discussions. The more vulnerable you can be, the more open you can be with your customers, the more open they're going to be with you. Think about that when you're looking at those mirror neurons, is if I want my customer to open up and answer questions and share with me personal details and really get into the deeper discussion as we talk about in that conversation game plan, then I better open up a little bit. I better share something personal. I better show them that I'm a human as well. And this becomes two humans talking. Right? And then when we think about it a little bit more, talk about sales history we just went through, we've heard of these things, right? Probing, objection handling, and closing, right? And it doesn't feel right when we start thinking about that old school style of selling. Everybody wants to, be able to be a closer. But it's not so much about being a closer, because think about this, as a person, nobody wants to be probed, right? Nobody wants to be handled. And nobody wants to be closed. So if you're trying to figure out how to handle objections, you're too late. Because in psychology, there's a principle called the principle of consistency, which means that when somebody vocalizes whether they will or won't do something, they're much more likely to stick with that because they've already proclaimed it publicly. So if somebody tells you an objection too early in the conversation, then you try and handle that objection, you're creating a really deep disconnect between them. That doesn't mean that we're not going to learn how to deal with challenges and how to be able to negotiate and be able to come to a win-win solution. It just means that you have to be really careful about not letting objections surface in the first place. And so what we want to do, rather than handling objections, is reduce resistance. We want to not have these things come up. We want to be able to create an atmosphere where it's an open discussion, two humans talking. It's not weird. It's fun. We're sharing stories. And at the end, we come up with an ability to solve a problem. And when we talk about resistance in psychology, there are two kinds of resistance. The first resistance is called knee-jerk or reactance. That's that gut feeling we get where we say, no, I don't want to do that. And if we present in the wrong way and we start to be salesy, you're going to create a lot of knee-jerk reactions where your customer goes, hold on, what about this and what about that? And if you haven't presented in the right way, now you're going to be constantly having to chase these knee-jerk resistances. More importantly is we want to talk about anticipated future regret. This is a powerful resistance. Is either, I'm going to do something and then regret it, or I'm not going to do something and I'll regret it. So in your conversations, you want to first of all keep those knee-jerk reactants kind of resistance at bay, and then focus on how do you paint a picture for the long term. And the easiest way, rather than talking about facts and figures and trying to get them to remember all the stuff you're saying, is using stories. Now, I'm not talking about some flowery story that you're going to do and you're going to, they're going to sit and listen to you for an hour. These are stories that you can do in 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever you use. Your ability to craft a story is an easy way to get them to shift their thinking, is for you to do a pattern interrupt, for you to create this limbic system connection with them and start to create trust. And they're asking themselves constantly, do I trust this person, or are they like every other salesperson? And if you have a disconnect and those mirror neurons aren't firing and they're feeling logically that everything they have to process and that reptilian brain is pushing them back saying, hey, this doesn't feel right, you're never going to have a chance to succeed unless your offer is absolutely mind-blowing and they can't refuse it, and then they don't care who you are or what you're saying. But when we're talking about this, you really want to build a story. And let's look at with the story structure itself. When you want to do this pattern interrupt, the easiest thing is to move their brain from one side to the other and say, hey, can I tell you a story? Or that reminds me of a story. Or can I share your story with you? Most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, they're going to say, sure. As long as you don't get in the habit of telling them 20-minute stories, but your story is going to have a point. And when we do the module on selling with stories, all of this will make a ton of sense. But if you think about the structure of a story, what has to happen, right? If I just told you a story that said, chapter 1, everything's fine. Chapter 2, everything's just fine. I remember Jim Rohn sharing this in one of his audios. And chapter 3 is everything's just fine. And chapter 4, that's a boring story. You're never going to read that. So stories follow a very specific arc. And so common story structures kind of look like this. Is we've got, it rises and then it falls with the climax in the middle. We've got these, other ones that create rising tension and falling action, the resolution. There's these great ones, if you ever heard the hero's journey, where it's this whole circular thing and there's these things that happen and the people that are involved. I really love that model. And then there's these more complicated ones where they do a bunch of different things. And then this one where it's more graphical and all of that. It's just all these different people writing these different versions of stories, but it's really quite simple. They all follow a very similar pattern. Now, when you go and talk to somebody and you want to interrupt that pattern, you want to interrupt what's happening and you're losing their attention, you say, can I tell you a story? And they say, sure. What you do is you follow this 4-step process. You say, okay, well, here's the situation. From what it sounds like is in your business or in your life, it's been going like this. You've been having success with this. And what you've told me so far is it goes like this and it goes like this. And what you're trying to do in that situation is make sure that you've connected them to the story, or that they're connecting emotionally to that story. And then you say, but what we've found is that these challenges have arisen. And that this is happening. And because of that, this is happening. And so you're going to gather that information through your ability to ask questions. And as you're sharing insights, you're going to create those little aha moments where they're like, yeah, that's right. And who else is affected by this? So you start to create this, say, so this is what's been happening. This has been good. But here's the challenge and here's what you're seeing. And what you're looking for when you're telling that story is you're looking for them to nod in approval that you're starting to connect that story to them. Then you go, however, what we've realized is that if we can just address this one thing, and then this happens, and we can solve this one thing by doing this, this, and this, then you're going to start to feel this, and they're going to be kind of nodding, and you're going to see maybe their shoulders sort of shrink down a little bit, and they're going to relax in their posture, and their eyes are going to widen, they're going to, yeah, that does feel like what I need to do, because what's going to happen in 6 months or a year, this is how this story is going to unfold and resolve, and you're going to feel like this, and this is what's going to go on. And that's the point when you simply ask, have I missed anything? And that's the only time in your process that you want somebody to say no, right? And if you have missed something, they're going to bring it up and say, well, it's kind of like this or it's kind of like that. And now you guys are discussing the story itself, which bubbles up any of those objections that you didn't necessarily need to handle in the beginning. And this is a really simple way that you can do it in a conversation, as a paraphrase, through an email when you're trying to gain that widespread acceptance, or just in a conversation that you have with a group of people, just to make sure that everybody's opinions have been expressed. And this story structure is really, really powerful tool to connect emotionally and bypass that reptilian system. And plus, it allows you to put more details because people can connect with information much easier in a story. And we found this great infographic by a group called OneSpot about how storytelling affects your brain. And let's go through these 4 things. This is really, really cool. And I'll put a link to that infographic below here. But the first thing is that a story, and part of it is called neural coupling. And the story activates parts in your brain that allows them to turn that story into their own ideas and experience. And so they couple themselves with that story. So the stronger that you make that situation and the complication and challenge, the more likely they're going to neurally couple. I think that's how you say it, neurally couple with the story itself. So you have to make sure that when you tell a story that is resonating the right way. The second thing that it does is, we talked about this, mirroring. The listener is not only going to experience a similar brain activity, but also to the speaker. They're going to start to connect with you because you guys are sharing this same experience. Even though it's a story and a listener, the more connected that story is, so they're going to neurally couple with the story, and they're also going to mirror neuron with you. So now you guys are in the story together. Really, really powerful. The next thing it does is it releases dopamine. We love hearing stories, and the more exciting and the more engaging those stories are, the more it fires into that reptilian, that pattern interrupt, and the limbic system. We get excited. We want to know what happens to the main character, and the more we've neurally coupled with it, the more that main character is us, and we want to see this thing solve. And so also, it's going to allow us emotionally to remember more logic with greater accuracy, as it says here. And the last thing that's going to happen is that when we're processing information, they've talked about these 2 areas of the brain, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's areas, is that a good story at the right time to solve the right situation is actually going to involve a lot more of the brain than if you were to just try and give them some kind of a piece of paper that says, here's what you've got. So the better you can tell a story, the better you can connect with your customers by using emotions and stories and bypassing these, resisting objections and all this logic, the more success you're going to have with this. And so what I want you to do for this video, for this activity, is I want you to write down the emotions of your product, not just what your product does. Forget about features and benefits, but talk about what are the emotions that this feature solves. When they experience that benefit, how do they feel, right? Then the next one is, can you map out what a future looks like? I'm hoping you've had one happy customer. What's the resolution look like for them? What's that turning point? Can you identify that sales moment, that aha moment that they go, yeah, that's exactly what I want to solve? And then try writing it out, a sample story arc. Here's the situation. In your world, it goes like this and it goes like this, but here's the challenge that you've experienced. But if we realize if we can just change this thing, then this time in 6 months, 3 months, and a year, here's where you're going to be. Have I missed anything? And by doing this, you're going to set yourself up for massive success. And as we go through, when we build into the segmenting, building our offers, understanding how to create the conversation, this will all flow very nicely. In the next video, we're going to be going through how to properly understand your customer using empathy and by segmenting them. So I look forward to talking to you then.